Hello and welcome to the Gale Hill Radio Hour. I'm your host, Kate Jones, here with cartoonist Bentley Boyd, creator of Chester Comix, which turned 20 years old in early 2023. Welcome to the show, Bentley, and congratulations on that milestone.
Thank you very much.
Did you celebrate?
I try to celebrate every single day that I get to still draw.
That's fabulous. So Chester Comix tells history stories with the help of your narrator, Chester, a Chesapeake Bay blue crab. Okay, so there's a lot to talk about here. Why history? Why tell it through comics? Why a crab? Why Chesapeake Bay? And what keeps you going with this project anyway? So, Bentley, where would you like to start?
That's a nice menu of questions. First of all, thank you very much for having me. It's fun to talk about my work. Every artist has that dream. It'll be interesting to try and draw pictures in your mind on an audio format. I always drew growing up and thought that I would be a newspaper political cartoonist my whole life. And so was laser focused on that. Of course, did all the school newspaper stuff. I drew for my college newspaper 5 days a week, all towards that goal of sort of working that muscle. It's a very particular muscle. It's almost like being a stand-up comedian where every single day you've got to take the headlines of the morning and by the evening turn it into some sort of gag that, makes people think, makes them laugh. It's a very specialized skill. And I was fortunate enough that as I practiced and then got my first job in Mansfield, Ohio, they gave me some space to practice that there. And then I moved to a newspaper in Virginia, in Williamsburg, that was owned by the Chicago Tribune, and got my dream job only 5 years after graduating college.
Wow.
So there. I'm done, right? 1995, I'm done. And so I'm drawing cartoons about Clinton. I'm drawing cartoons about the governor, sort of slice of life things like the traffic jams. And I was a history major, so I loved living in Williamsburg because I could work in an occasional tri-cornered hat in my cartoons. And that was all just going swimmingly. And then the newspaper wanted to do a nice package for the anniversary of Earth Day, which happens in the spring. And I thought that would be a fun way to kind of stretch my cartooning legs because, as I mentioned, I studied history in college. I did not study art. I never took an art class other than what you or I would have taken in high school.
I just want to interject with something you wrote on your website in your About the Author section. There was no class at Harvard University to learn how to draw a talking crab on Patrick Henry's shoulder.
That's right. So I guess, my father was an art professor. I never took one of his classes, which I greatly regret now. But what he taught me was the value in taking a chance. He taught me a certain amount of fearlessness. And so I had already been fearless in pursuing this dream of being a political cartoonist. And then the newspaper editors came to me and said, well, we'd like to do just, 3 or 4 days of the history of Earth Day. And would you like to do something for kids? And so there was this open door. And I thought, well, I've got a 3-year-old at home. I have always read comic strips in the newspaper. I was a newspaper guy, from head to toe. And so I thought, well, sure, let's give it a try because, if it doesn't work, then it's over in 4 days and I can go back to drawing the governor. So I came up with 2 animals, actually. One was a turtle who had the recycling triangle on his shell. And I've always liked turtles, and I thought the drawing was pretty good, very cute. But then the other one was a Chesapeake Bay blue crab because we lived just off the bay. It was a very strange and wonderful place for me. I grew up, the child and grandchild of Ohio farmers. I'm a landlubber, okay? I've never owned a boat. And all of the seafood and the wonderful senses and smells that you could get from going to, say, Virginia Beach, which is just on the road, it was all very strange to me. It was like, sci-fi.
Ooh, adventure.
Adventure. And so I thought, well, let's try a crab. And I took both of those animals to the editors, right? Just rough sketches, and I let them pick. And they didn't like the turtle, but they did like Chester. I think they thought he was more unique. He certainly was more local. I mean, turtles are lots of places, but the Chesapeake Bay has a very specific kind of crab, and they're quite beautiful. They really are, this wonderful kind of bluish green. And I smoothed that out into kind of a teal color, and we did 4 days explaining Earth Day, and everybody loved it. And then it went away, and I went back to drawing the governor. and I thought, well, now wait a minute. If people read it and really liked it, is there a way to keep doing that in some way? And it took a couple of years to kind of work that out with the editors. But in 1997, I started drawing just a once a week feature on whatever I wanted. And it was weird stuff. It was all kind of history based because, again, that was my major. But like sometimes it was like, okay, which came first, crunchy or creamy peanut butter?
Okay.
I mean, that's
I bet
history.
That went over big.
Yeah, I was disappointed in the answer. It was creamy, not crunchy. I'm a crunchy guy.
Me too.
But that was just sort of a side thing to the political cartoons. And then in 1999, they had a big powwow that my editor-in-chief called. He had a big luncheon with all these educators. And this was a time when the state tests in a lot of states around the nation were getting really hard. Right? Like they were asking kids questions about economics that you and I didn't study until college, right? Things like what is opportunity cost? And they were trying to teach that to fourth graders. They were trying to teach third graders about a lot of complicated things, again, that we didn't really study until maybe government in high school. And so they're sitting around this big table. I did not get invited to the lunch. I want the record to show that. But one of these assistant superintendents for one of our local school districts said, well, you've got this guy who's drawing this crab. Why don't you just make him tell these complicated historical things to third, fourth, and fifth graders?
Oh, that's excellent.
And Virginia, it's a nice sized state, but it's not Texas, it's not Florida, it's not California, it's not New York. When those states come up with new tests, the textbook publishers rush to make a book specifically for Texas or Florida or New York. But Virginia wasn't quite that big, so the teachers were having trouble, finding materials on these complicated things like what is opportunity cost or some things about Harriet Tubman that you might not have known. Really interesting, detailed things that I didn't learn when I was in fifth grade. I just learned because I was a history geek, and that's what I read for pleasure. So they came to me and they said, would you like to stop doing the political stuff and jump into doing Chester full-time, 5 days a week during the school year? And we're just going to go through this list of all these complicated things.
Wow.
And I said, yes. And so,
Did you have to think about it for very long?
I didn't think about it at all. I didn't think about it at all because it was a dream I didn't know I had.
Yes.
The political cartooning was a dream I had always had. But drawing a history comic to help kids about the subjects that I care about in my own nerdy way, I just couldn't imagine. It was like I went to Oz.
Order.
It was made to order, right? Suddenly there I am talking to the Wizard of Oz, and the wizard says, do you want a heart and a brain and a job? I said, yes, sure.
I'd be a fool to turn that down.
I'd be a fool to turn that down. So we did it for 5 years, and near the end of that run, I asked to have the reprint rights to turn it into my own business so that I could sell it beyond Virginia. And the newspaper was small enough that they said sure, because they did not have the staff to do it. They didn't have the time or the energy or the money. And so I took on all that risk. I ran up the credit card debt, and we've been doing it for 20 years.
Wow. So what sustains you? I mean, here now, this business has lasted for 20 years. You are celebrating its 20th year anniversary. And what sustains you through the 2 decades now?
Well, every day we make new history.
Yes, true.
And it's a little sad for me to look around and see that with the changes in the world over the last 20 years, it feels like the work I do is needed more than ever. And some of it is just technological. Some of it is the shorter attention spans of the kids. Some But some of it is, quite frankly, political. History education is kind of under fire, has been the last couple of years with cries of critical race theory, which is actually not a thing in fifth grade, but it has had a chilling effect. The reading levels have changed. When I started doing Chester in 1999, I had a committee of teachers that helped every single episode meet our reading guidelines. It was great. I didn't have one editor. I had like a dozen.
Wow.
We'd sit around this table.
Usually one is enough.
Usually one is enough. But they were all very excited about getting this unique material. And so I would share my really, chicken scratching drawings with them. And I'd try and work out my jokes, and they would say, okay, well, this is good, but this word is too big for a third grader, right? Or we need you to teach this about Nat Turner, so you've got to do this. And so it was great. They were my friends as much as they were my editors, and they were there every step of the way. But those same episodes that were for third graders in 1999, now I have middle school teachers buying those. Okay,
wow.
Because the world is changing.
Yes.
The kids are online all the time. They're playing video games all the time. We're all looking at our phones all the time. And so I have to adapt my work to the world that I live in. But every year there's a new crop of fifth graders who need to learn about the Articles of Confederation, and it feels like I'm sort of fighting a slipping action because more and more people are having these arguments on social media, but they clearly don't understand things about our history, our government, what's in the Constitution, what isn't. And so I'm doing everything I can to try and help Americans talk to each other. But it does feel like the mountain to climb is getting higher and higher.
I think you provide a wonderful service, Bentley.
You.
And for adults as well. I actually ordered some of your books. I bought World War II, mm-hmm. War for Independence, mm-hmm. Heroic Folk, mm-hmm. Go West, Young Crab. I love that title, Go West, Young Crab.
So I've been doing this so long that the Go West, Young Crab makes a reference to the Oregon Trail video game, right? Which actually was almost pitched to me when I was a kid. It was just a little late for me, but my sons grew up playing that. And now it's kind of a joke among millennials. They remember this really basic early 90s video game, right? Where you'd have to try and make choices that would get you all the way to Oregon as a settler.
Okay.
I don't know if you remember that game. But now, today's fifth graders don't play Oregon Trail. It's a joke that doesn't land anymore. So as I reprint my episodes and draw new ones, I have to sort of update my video game references. It's a constant effort.
So the original reference doesn't do it.
Not so much anymore. No.
It did it for me. I really liked it.
Well, good. Very good. It is interesting. Of course, when I started this, I literally had a third grader in school, and then his younger brother coming up behind him graduated in 2015. So there was a big chunk of this time, this creativity, where I was in contact with my readership, right? I knew the jokes that were being made by the kids. I could reference those. I knew what they were watching. And now, as a 56-year-old, and my sons are grown and they don't have children yet, it's a little harder, right? I have to go on to TikTok and sort of listen to what the lingo is. And I don't ever want to pretend that I am that age, right? I'm not hip and cool. I'm not on TikTok myself. I'm just listening.
Right.
But I want to speak in a language that still lands. And the good news is, as I have, sold and given some of these books to my coworkers at the day job, they take it home to their kids, and it still lands.
Oh, that's excellent. Well, you made it through COVID, your business did.
COVID, yeah.
How did that affect things? Not in the sense of, I don't know, purchases or anything, but what I'm really thinking is maybe how it affected the kids, because they were really, got behind during the whole COVID thing.
So the good news is that in the 20 years that I've been doing this, I've constantly been thinking about the audience and that delivery. And so before COVID hit, I was already transitioning my printed books onto iPads, and I did a Kickstarter to make a smartphone app, which you can get for your iPhone. Because teachers before COVID were talking about the flipped classroom is a phrase. And what that means is instead of kids sitting in the classroom and getting the content for the first time, right? Like a lecture, and then they go home and do their homework. A flipped classroom is they're told, go home, read this or this or this on your iPad or website, right? Like use your mom's computer or your dad's smartphone and read this information at home. And then when you come back to the classroom the next day, that's when you ask follow-up questions to the teacher, and then you do the homework in class, because then when you have a question on, the last part of the homework, you can ask the teacher who's standing right there.
Interesting.
So basically you just invert the way you and I went to school.
Uh-huh.
And so I was trying to get my stuff to a place where kids could access it at 7:00 at night. Instead of in the classroom. And so all of the titles are there in iBooks for you to download onto your iPads. I have a lot of samples on my website, which is just simply Chester Comix with an X, COMIX.com. And I'm pretty proud of the smartphone app.
I like it.
Thank you.
Yeah. I think it's really good. I think the one I purchased was Jane Addams.
Yeah, I
good
love
old
Jane.
Yeah.
Well, because those things are digital, that's a way for me to refresh them, right? I can actually add new jokes. I can literally take what was maybe 40 panels in the newspaper on a printed page, and my stories on the app are about 80 panels, right? So I'm adding details, I'm adding color to the story, and I'm updating the jokes. So digital is a lot of fun for me as a creator because I can fiddle with things that I first drew in 2002.
Right. So how many books have Chester Comix have you done?
So I've published 36. I'm working on my next one now. And one of the things that I figured out along this wonderful journey is I've been paid by some really interesting places to do a comic book for them specifically. Like I've done the official comic book biography of George Washington for Mount Vernon in Virginia.
Wonderful.
And Colonial Williamsburg had a wonderful street theater thing called Revolutionary City that they did that was really the revolution from an everyday person's point of view, right? So you would meet a woman who owned a tavern. And we know she really lived because we have the records of her tavern. So you'd meet somebody portraying her and what difficulty she had during the war because prices went up. She had inflation. War is hard for people doing regular business. You'd meet people who were enslaved, who were talking about escaping to the Redcoats because the British Army was offering them freedom. It was a really interesting and accurate way to understand this war that most of us, we get the top level. Right, we get George Washington, but we don't get Jane Vobe, who is one of the characters. So they came to me at one point and said, "Could you do a comic book? Here's the script, right? We've run this through all of our fact checkers. It's on the street for any tourist to see. But if the tourist wants to take the story home, we don't have a way for them to do that. Would you like to do a comic book of it?" And I said yes, but it was so much material. And I was trying to figure out, how do I deliver the vibrancy of standing on Duke of Gloucester Street in Williamsburg and seeing this story swirl around you? Because that's what was great about the theater thing. It wasn't up on a stage. It was literally on the street where the tourists were. You were meeting these people shoulder to shoulder.
Immersive theater.
It was immersive theater, and I loved it. And so what I came up with was a choice comic. I would break the scenes down into one page, and at the bottom of the page, it's not that you're changing history, but it is, there's this debate that swirls around you. And then, do you decide to go left with the Patriots or go right with the Loyalists? Or, maybe you're going left with the Patriots, or you go to the right where you just don't want to be involved. Because that's one of the great factoids that history now understands about the Revolution, but most Americans don't. it wasn't good guys versus bad guys. If you looked at the whole population of America, probably a third wanted independence, a third wanted to stay with the king, and a third were just on their farms saying, you guys are crazy, leave me alone. So that's not really like us versus them. It was really like a civil war.
Oh, my goodness. So this is very interesting, Bentley, because you had mentioned when we spoke before, the choice comics, and I didn't really get it. And now I do with that explanation. That is fascinating.
It's a lot of fun for me as a creator because I always have told my stories ever since I started Chester in the 90s. I always told them in present tense. If you read them, you'll see that Chester is using the verb is. Right? It's not that we know how the story is going to turn out. I really have always wanted to put the reader in the middle because today we are living history and we don't know how tomorrow's going to turn out. That's the sense that I wanted. And the choice comic just allows me to really crank that up to 11, right?
Yes.
Which is, history is not built from the top down. It's built from all the choices that we make as individuals, and then they sort of grow from the ground up into these big moments.
Wow. How did you come up with the choice comics concept?
Well, so it's much like those Choose Your Own Adventure chapter books that the kids got, which I remember being very popular in the 90s. My kids read them. They had like Star Wars versions of it where you'd read a couple of pages, not illustrated, and then there would be a little, choice. You'd say, well, if you want, Han Solo to fly to this planet, turn to this page. But if you want him to stay where he is, turn to this page. And I thought that was a great idea, but it was a little clunky. I think the choice comics work a little better because you've got the visuals, and then at the bottom of every single page, you get the choice.
Okay.
And I also make these comics so that you could actually read them start to finish, and they're still in chronological order. So in other words, you do jump around a little bit if you want to make the choices, but you could read my Revolutionary City comic start to finish, and it would just tell you the story in chronological order.
It would make sense.
It would make sense, right? We're not going from like 1783 back to 1775, right? You can just read it straightforward, or you can read it as a choice. The choice is at the bottom of the page, and you will jump forward different lengths of time, but you never jump back.
Okay.
I have not figured out how to go back in time.
Well, maybe sometime.
Maybe someday. And so the concept just sat there, and I kept thinking of like, where's the next one that I'm going to do? And one of the holes in all of the books that I've done was, history that I've lived. I had done all this stuff about the Civil War. I've covered World War II, as you mentioned. But I was like, I really need to cover the Korean War and the Vietnam War. And those are still so sensitive. And I was born in 1967. So, I remember the last day in South Vietnam with the helicopters leaving the roof. And, I remember Nixon resigning. I was always very political. I remember watching the Watergate hearings with my mom, sitting in the kitchen with her. So getting into history that I remember, it gets harder for me, right? Because now and there really isn't a right or wrong in telling the story of the Vietnam War. It's very complicated. So I thought, well, let's apply the choice comic to that, where there, it sort of removes me as the narrator and as the creative voice through Chester to just say, here's something that happened in Korea or Vietnam, and here's the choice that Americans were trying to make in 61 or 65 or 1970. And which way would you go? The choice comic solved my creative problem.
Oh, that is terrific.
I didn't have to decide. I'm leaving it to the readers to decide.
Right. But is it more complicated for you to do?
It is on the front end,
Yes.
but boy, I'm really excited about it. So that now the book I'm working on currently is I'm going back to the decade before the Civil War. And remember, I've done like 6 books about the Civil War, but I've never done a choice comic about the Civil War. So I'm going back and trying to place the reader in that decade before the Confederates fire on Fort Sumter. And I'm trying to get modern readers to feel just how crazy it felt to the people living those days who did not know how it would turn out. And I think if you read that book, when I print it, it's going to feel a lot like the last 10 years that we've lived in the United States in the 21st century. That's my thesis as a creator is, this polarization, the demonization of your fellow Americans, this sense of, well, okay, we're just going to leave and make our own place because we can't get along with you people anymore. I see a lot of things around me that remind me of the 1850s. And
yes,
so
rings a bell, doesn't it?
It rings a bell,
boy,
sadly.
Oh, boy. So Chester does comment.
He does. He's my voice.
Contemporary way, doesn't he?
He does, yeah. He will make the Star Wars jokes, and he'll make disco jokes, and you might see a stray Weird Al Yankovic sign caricature. So Chester is not crabby. That's one of the questions that I like to answer. He's not a stereotypical crab. He's really my voice. So he's pretty enthusiastic. I hope that people think he's funny. He will sort of poke and prod famous figures, like you'll hear somebody like George Washington or Abe Lincoln, give one of their famous speeches, and then Chester will sort of say, yeah, but, he'll sort of poke a little air in their pontification. And I also have a set of modern students that were originally meant to help the teachers and the students sort of line up when the story is supposed to be taught, whether it's fourth grade or fifth grade. Okay. So my oldest son is the fifth grade character, and it's a diverse group of students. So it's very similar to things like the Magic School Bus was very popular when I was creating Chester in the 90s. My kids loved the Magic School Bus, and it was doing the same kind of work with modern students as kind of sidekicks. But it was for science, right? Magic School Bus did science, and I kind of borrowed some of that energy for history. So sometimes Chester does have a modern student who will sort of ask those questions. We'll say, well, wait a minute, if so-and-so is saying this, what about, the enslaved people kind of a thing, right? They will bring a modern sensibility. It's not just Chester, it's also the students. But I've also, been very careful. Like I don't put a student at D-Day. I'm not going to drop them into the middle of a pretty major, battle or something that's more somber, let's say.
Right. Okay. You mentioned Weird Al.
Yeah.
And on your website, you just referenced briefly, but of course it intrigued me, how you met Weird Al and Doris Kearns Goodwin.
Yes.
And handed them signed copies as thanks for helping me or inspiring me.
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm.
So please talk about that, if you would.
I think my strength in being this kind of a storyteller is that I have all of these pieces and I blend them together. This is not false modesty. I do not consider myself a very good writer. I do not consider myself a very good artist, but comics allows me to mix those things together, and it's kind of alchemy, right? I can be better at mixing those things than if I were just a writer or just an artist. And so then I've got that mix going, and then I mix, serious history, right? I literally read Doris's works for fun. But then I also listen to Weird Al songs, and I've taken my sons to 3, not 1, not 2, 3 Weird Al concerts.
I love his concerts. My son was, he's 31 now. He loved Weird Al for a period of time, and I have been to at least 2 concerts.
There you go. We love the costume changes. We love all the video stuff he does.
The parodies are fabulous.
The parodies were a way for me to share some 90s music with my kids when they were young. And, if you remember, a lot of that grunge stuff was very dark, but Weird Al, had fun with them. So like my sons know the Weird Al version. They don't know the top 40 version. And so I mix all of this together and out comes Chester. And I've been doing it long enough that, yes, he brought his family to visit Jamestown, and I was doing contract work for the nonprofit that ran the archaeological dig. So I was, part of the staff that helped lead him around an open archaeological dig site, he and his wife and his daughter. And I gave him some of my Jamestown-themed books, and I was able to, get a picture with him, but literally say thank you for your sense of humor, for inspiring me. And here's how it came out through my voice, right? There have been dark times in being a small businessman, a self-published person. I see a lot of young people that are doing beautiful art, and it's inspiring to me, but I worry about them because there's kind of a flood of really interesting voices. And in this country, and as a human being, we are guaranteed the chance to create art, but nobody is guaranteed an audience. Nobody's guaranteed a living at it.
Right.
And so I caught a very specific moment in time. The newspaper was my incubator, right? They paid me to develop these ideas, and I was very, very fortunate because I left newspaper work right when it started to collapse and turned this into my own business, and things were going great for a while, and then the Great Recession happened, right? That was a body blow. And then, you sort of recover from that, and then COVID happens, And so in those dark times, being a creative person, it's hard to look at a blank piece of paper and do the next thing if you don't feel that energy and if you're worried about, well, how am I paying my bills? But every single time that I would be in those dark places, if I had a speaking gig where I would go to, I've been all over the country. I've done speaking gigs about my work in San Antonio, Wisconsin, Boston, New Jersey, just all over. And invariably, like, I would be maybe getting a little glum, a little isolated, a little worn out from trying to be both a creator and the person who boxes up the comics and ships them. Okay. That gets tiring. And then I would go and I'd spend a day talking to fifth graders, and they were so excited, and they laughed at my jokes as I drew on an overhead, and they thought it was great. And I would just come back all full of energy and excited to keep going. And so now I don't do so many of those school talks because COVID really did remove that. I think a lot of schools just sort of got out of the habit of doing that. I would like to restart that again, but, I've got the day job now. Chester is really an evening and weekends pursuit, and it's very good for my mental and emotional health to keep doing it. This is clearly why I was put on the planet. My kids are grown, and until I have grandkids, this is what I get to do with my time.
I think it's lovely. Well, one of the things, and I think your text on your website is very well done. And you say you're not, that great of a writer, but you are really, Bentley. Yeah. And I love this. The first generation of Chester readers are now doctors and professors and soldiers and parents themselves. I'm on my third generation of young readers. What a tremendous blessing.
It is. It is. I'm very proud. I'm thinking of one in particular who is an economics professor. And one of those doctors just had his first child a year ago. So I'm looking forward to sending Chester Comix to those kids.
Oh, that's terrific. So you obviously are very interested in U.S. history because this is what your whole Chester Comix line is about. Though you do have the ancient civilizations.
Yes, because that was on those tests in Virginia, and we did quite a few episodes, but I found that as a business, when I split from the newspaper and made it my own business, those were actually my slowest selling titles. So they've come and gone. They are still available digitally for iPads. And that makes me a little sad because I feel like that kind of global knowledge we really need. But again, gosh, every year there's a new crop of fifth graders who need to know about the Constitution. So
Sure.
I've tried to really focus on that because I do see that as an increasing need, an ongoing need.
Right, right. So I understand also that you are very interested in music history, particularly rock, rockabilly.
Yes. Well, that's how
I vaguely remember a Stray Cats conversation.
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah.
Rock Me Amadeus.
Yes, that too. Well, that's how I solved, the Korea Vietnam book. It's a choice book. And again, I don't decide what the right choices in that set of history would be, but both tracks, right? If you choose left or right, they both end up in disco, which I think
can't escape it.
You can't escape it, and it's a happy ending no matter what you choose.
That's wonderful. You have a Wonder Women feature, and that's interesting too. Clara Barton and Harriet Tubman and Susan B. Anthony and Helen Keller. And then you go on to Wonder Women of your century.
Right.
Yes.
Right. I actually got to meet Sally Ride.
That's cool. Wonder Women of the 20th century, obviously. And I wanted to know if you are going to do a sequel to that.
I think after I do this book set in the 1850s, my next book will be about the last 20 years that you and I have lived.
Okay.
And it'll be probably a choice book, and it'll be tough. Because my view, again, as a 56-year-old person, Gen X, is that, we've felt a lot of progress, I think, in the 70s and 80s and 90s. And the last 20, 25 years have seen the erosion, if not the outright attack on those pieces of progress. So I do plan a sequel because I admire many of the people in our time today who are fighting the same kinds of fights that Jane Addams and Harriet Tubman were fighting in their time. There is a problem with human trafficking right now, and that is exactly what Harriet Tubman was addressing. So, some of this stuff, I make it clear in the way that I sell these books, say, about the Vietnam War and what I'm thinking of for this next book about the 21st century. I'm not going to be selling those to fifth graders. I do want to make that clear. The choice comics are really aimed at a middle or high school audience.
Okay.
And I'm still careful about, how I present the information, right? There's nothing that's horrifying or R-rated. But they're clearly for a more sophisticated audience that can talk about these choices, right? And the pluses and the minuses of all of them. And I would dearly love to do a book about the 21st century and the choices that we've all been faced with since the election of 2000, really.
Okay. Yeah, I think that would be in order. We need things like that. Is there anything else you want to talk about regarding these books and any, whatever? I
feel that this is what I was put on the planet to do, and I'm very thankful that I have a market for this work. If the sales disappeared tomorrow, I would still draw them because I think that this is important for Americans to discuss, to know, to carry forward. And I've sort of given myself a job that will never go away because we make history every day.
Every single day. I do want to say something, and I'm glad that my notes reminded me. I want to talk about your privacy policy on your app.
Oh, sure.
Because I thought that was very cool that you don't sell any ads. Well, you talk about it.
No, it's probably cost me some sales because the advertising and the in-app purchases are such a big part of that business model. But I decided more than a decade ago that I wasn't going to do any of that, that I really wanted to keep this clean. So my app sales are not great. They're not going to pay for a trip to France. But I believe very strongly that this information should not be sullied, right? That it is meant to be educational, and I want families to feel secure in that I am a trained historian. I check my material with people smarter than me, either authors or people who are managing these public history sites. I do a lot of work with the National Park Service, for example. So I want families to come and not be distracted by any kind of ad for this or that or the other product. I don't want them to worry about their privacy. I'm not going to be using it to try and sell them other things.
Yeah, I love it that you don't sell any personal information.
Nothing. I want them to just come and read the material and talk about it as a family because it's really, really important material. We have reached a point in this country's history where I feel that the tribalism has really grown to a dangerous level. And the founding fathers actually were very worried that they could not keep the country connected up and down the eastern seaboard. They were worried that there was too much land already in just the 13 colonies, okay? And look at how far we've spread since.
Sure.
So it's a crazy thing that we are this representative democracy from sea to shining sea. We have, 335 million people, and we're all basically held together by these ideas that you can see discussed in Chester Comix. We're held together by ephemeral things, by ideas. And if we lose those ideas, if we lose touch with them, or we decide we don't like them anymore, and we don't like the ideas that that group has over there, then this all falls apart.
Yes. So tenuous.
It's tenuous.
Wow. Well, you are doing really fine work. So how do people get a hold of it?
So all of it can be found, whether it's on social media or on your app store or through the website, just by following the name of the business, which is Chester, the name that you would normally spell, Chester. And then Comix, I spell Comix because it's a mix of words and pictures. So chestercomics.com or Chester Comix in your app store.
That's interesting that you said that it's a mix of words and pictures, because I thought, that's a made up name. So I look in my little dictionary thing at the bottom of my computer, and it's a real plural. And it apparently, it was really came into use in the 70s, early 70s.
Early 70s, late 60s, as part of what we call the underground comics movement. And so those were people who were not drawing Superman or Batman or Spider-Man. They were just really doing avant-garde kind of counterculture stuff, hippie stuff, but very personal stuff. And I see a lot of threads that came from the underground comics movement being expressed today by Gen Z, who are doing wonderful, beautiful, colorful things, but they tend to be very personal stories, right? My stories are actually not personal. You get a little bit of my point of view through Chester's voice, but I'm talking about, public things. I'm talking about history. I'm not talking about my own feelings.
Right.
They're doing these wonderful rainbow comics about their feelings in 2023. Like they're actually making historic documents that maybe someday I would look back at.
Wow.
If you can understand that difference.
I sure do. That is interesting.
So they're making their comics. I'm making my comics.
Yeah. Lovely, Bentley. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for being on the show. I'll have links, in the show description and everything to your site and how to get to your app. And I'll promote it as much as I can.
Thank you very much. And, tomorrow's going to be more history I got to draw.
Yes. And go to it, young crab. Thanks again.
Thank you.
This is Kate Jones with the Gale Hill Radio Hour. Until next time, thanks for joining us. Please share this episode with anybody who would like to learn history and have fun and not have it be a painful thing doing it.